Hello and welcome to COVID Conversations here on WNCU 90.7 FM. I'm Kimberley Pierce Cartwright, your host, and I'm the News and Public Affairs Director at WNCU. And we're using the Zoom platform to talk about how COVID-19 is affecting our world. We are streaming on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram as well. Now, my guest today is Yanqi, and she is Courts, Law, and Democracy reporter for North Carolina Policy Watch. And today we're going to be talking about a much talked about and debated issue about landlords and tenant evictions during COVID-19. And I'd like to say hello, Yanqi, and welcome to COVID Conversations.
Thank you, Kimberly, for having me.
Oh, you're so welcome. And you have been doing a lot of research and a lot of writing about this particular issue. So I'm really glad to have you here to talk about these stories. So first question, what are tenants who can't afford rent facing right now? And you've profiled a number of people in your stories about them being under threat of eviction.
Yeah, for sure. So right now, we have lots of different tenants with all kinds of situations they're facing, right? So one, a lot of them can't pay. So the most recent data, I believe, from the Census Bureau shows that more than 200,000 renter households are behind on rent, and so that's about 11% of all renters in here in North Carolina. So when they are in this situation, their landlords can still file for eviction because the CDC moratorium doesn't prevent the filing of evictions. And so right now, they have the option of going to court to defend themselves, and they can use the CDC protection, but it's not a surefire, means of defending them. And so specifically, the CDC moratorium has some, requirements, because it's not that it's protecting all tenants who can't pay. They have to meet a certain income requirement. They can, they either earn less than $99,000 or they receive a stimulus check from the CARES Act. And also sometimes they need to show proof that they have lost their income, or they have to testify, not to show proof exactly, but to testify that they have lost their source of income. And then they have incurred medical expenses and things like that. So they can use this as a way of, avoiding evictions, but, there's still a legal process waiting for them if they are ever, taken to court. That's kind of their situation in a nutshell.
Well, I mean, it sounds like it's really cut and dry. And if you don't know like what the underpinnings of it are, you think that people are totally protected from being evicted if they can't pay their rent. So can you talk a little bit more about what the moratorium provides and what it allows for people who are in a situation where they can't pay?
Yeah, exactly. I think the first, thing that people need to understand is that they have to be aware of this in order to invoke the protection, right? And so for my reporting and a lot of other, sources who've spoken with me about this told me a lot of tenants or, landlords nowadays, they don't even know about this, even though it's been in effect for, a more than half a year already. But the truth is, a lot of them didn't even know they had this case against them. I interviewed a source in Winston-Salem where the eviction notice was delivered in the mail. She never got it because she never had a key to her mailbox, because it costs extra money for her to get her mailbox key. And so she just found out about it when community organizations reached out to her and told her, actually, you just have an eviction case entered against you. And so they have to defend themselves in court. And if they want to use the CDC moratorium, they have to sign the declaration form in order to use the CDC moratorium to say, right now I can't pay because of all kinds of reasons. And so they can, if they invoke the moratorium, then their cases can be continued until the moratorium actually expires. That's beyond the end of June, basically.
So when I hear that people don't know about it, it's really hard for me to believe because it's all over the news, but everybody doesn't have the same kind of communication. And if they don't hear about the story, I guess, being reported, that landlords aren't going to tell. Do landlords actually know about this before they go into evict?
A lot of them don't. And also, so in one of my stories, so the tenant didn't know about the eviction of moratorium, and that's understandable because there's like a huge digital divide, right? So she didn't have internet service for quite a while. She lost her phone service, but in the meantime, her landlord successfully evicted someone despite the CDC moratorium in place, and the governor's order, that's like the state moratorium, required landlords to give notice to them, to give them an actual copy of the moratorium for them to sign. They have to sign an affidavit, basically, to include in their court files to say, I have provided the tenants with this, CDC moratorium so that they can argue to continue their cases. But I just don't think I've seen any of that in the court filings of the case of that landlord, because he filed other cases other than the source that I interviewed. So that was just kind of bizarre to me. You just don't know what ended up being in the eviction court unless you pay really close attention to it. I think that's kind of the takeaway.
So then some landlords who know about it, and they're really understanding what is in the moratorium for protections for tenants, are finding loopholes to get around what's in the moratorium, so that then they can go and do proceedings to go ahead and try to evict their tenants. So what are some of the loopholes that these landlords are using for their tenants?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would say from what some of the housing law professors have told me, there's a lot of confusion about how to interpret the CDC moratorium, and the governor's order interpreting the moratorium actually says that it mainly deals with non-payment cases. So the CDC moratorium itself says that it doesn't preclude other cases where there are criminal activities. And so, and also a lot of people say that, it also doesn't apply to lease violations. So a lot of people are claiming lease violations, and could be really minor things. So one of the tenants I featured in my article didn't have her gas turned on. And so her landlord knew about it all along, but didn't say anything about it until he found out that he couldn't evict her because of non-payment. He actually filed the case because of non-payment, but then changed the reason and then won the case. So it's like minor things like, alleged lease violations, and also there are other reasons like a holdover case where a tenant's lease has expired, because the CDC moratorium essentially only covers, leases that were in effect when it was entered. But once the lease runs out, there's no sort of protection for tenants that kind of force landlords to sign new leases, right? And so in that way, a lot of landlords can file for eviction and say, oh, they're remaining in my property, they're trespassing, And then, of course, there are other cases where this is what we heard from, community organizations where landlords just claim their, criminal activities, say that they smoke weed, but a lot of times if tenants are defending themselves, they don't really know how to really kind of pressure the landlords to present, admissible evidence to just substantiate their claims, because in small claims court, tenants really don't have a lot of experience, fighting against any kind of allegations criminally, yeah.
So what about people defending themselves in court? So if they don't have access to lawyers, then what is it? How does the law then expect them to come in and mount a defense that would help them to win their case?
Yeah, absolutely. And what we've seen in eviction court a lot is that landlords have their own lawyers. They oftentimes they have their own lawyers, and then, who actually specialize, in eviction law. They're huge law firms, or let me say that one more time. So like there are some law firms that specialize in eviction laws, and so they often represent large landlords like apartments, complexes, and stuff. And so, a lot of tenants just, they show up in court. They really don't know what's going on. They can tell the judge what their situation is, but it's very nuanced, right? Because tenants, they go to court. It's a lot of them are facing eviction for the first time in their lives, whereas a lot of landlords deal with the magistrates or the judges, presiding over these cases a lot, because it may not be their first time, filing eviction. And so, and also there's also this layer of intimidation, from landlords, because they basically have more bargaining chips, right? And then they can sue, they can file for eviction. They also can claim, they can try to collect their past rent. And so, and this process really moves very quickly in North Carolina state courts, from the notice of an eviction to the final judgment, it can just last, as short as a few weeks. And so a lot of tenants, know about it. They don't even show up in court because sometimes they got this summons and in a few days they have to show up. But, what if they have, other responsibilities? What if they can't take off work? And if someone's immigration status is in question, then they have a good reason not to engage with the, state court system. And so this really is, not, I would say, not a very equitable system that's set up, to historically always benefit landlords. And I think there are other studies that have been done, about North Carolina's, tenant landlord law and housing laws that says that it's definitely down at the bottom when it comes to protection of tenants.
Yeah, so that was a question that I wanted to ask or somewhat like it. What about equity with renters? They want to have a place to stay, a decent place to live. And then landlords, they want money to get paid for their property. So, how is the court striking a balance, or is there a balance in those kinds of situations?
Right. I think that's a really good question, because that's some of that question definitely emerged in my own reporting as well, because we wanted to find out, apparently a lot of them are owing rent. That's indisputable, because a lot of people are saying that they have entered a contract, and tenants not paying their rent is basically breaking the contract, right? But that's where, federal programs and rental assistance programs should really play a role, because when just normal people can't keep up because of the pandemic or during the pandemic, when they're just extreme circumstances, there really should be some sort of protection for them. That's why the CDC moratorium is coming into the picture, to prevent them from being kicked out of their homes. And then there's this, all these kind of, programs. So here in North Carolina, there's the Housing Opportunities and Prevention of Evictions. That's the HOPE program. And then also there's a new U.S. Treasury program that's called the Emergency Rent Relief Assistance Program. So I think one of the takeaways that I gathered from one of my sources that on the grander scheme, there's more money than the shortfall, or there's more assistance than the shortfall. But can we make sure that every landlord gets like every penny they wanted to have? Maybe not, because a lot of the programs, they don't really cover late fees and also other kinds of charges. And then so North Carolina's HOPE program tries to still keep tenants in housed by instituting kind of a non-eviction period after the coverage of the program. So there are strings attached from these kinds of programs, not to mention that we still have a foreclosure moratorium in place. And so you know everyone, when the economy is taking such a hit, I think it's kind of inevitable that people would have some price to pay. And you know the court system itself also provides other avenues for landlords to seek, relief. But if they keep evicting them, the truth is they're probably not going to get any money back. And so that kind of leads us to the question of, you know, what's in store for us once the economy starts picking up, and would we be seeing more landlords refusing these kind of assistance programs for the prospect of raising rent, or getting new tenants and shifting the tenant base out? I think that's a question worth asking. That's a question about equity, in my opinion.
Mhm. So we have come to the end of all the time that I have, but and I want to thank you very much for sharing your time with us with this very important issue. And I want people to know more about you. Where can people who are interested in learning more about your stories find that information?
Yeah, sure. So for our stories, they can visit Policy Watch's website. They could just Google NC Policy Watch, or sign up for our newsletters, or find us on Twitter or Facebook. And then they can also find my contact information if they want to reach out to me. And we just ran a 3-part series, about all the kind of loopholes in the state and federal moratoria, and we provided like an info box where people can find resources for assistance. And yeah, and if they want to talk to me, my contact information is also on our website.
So thank you so much for your time, Yanqi Xu. It's been my good pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yes. And audience, you've been watching and listening to COVID Conversations here on WNCU 90.7 FM. We want you to like us, follow us, and subscribe to our pages to see more of our archived shows. I'm Kimberley Pierce Cartwright, your host. Until next time.